Welcome to the 4 Habits podcast, where we help you build relationships that thrive at home, at work, and in life. We're Dr. Andrea and John Taylor-Cummings, and every week we bring you actionable insights to create meaningful connections and lasting success. So let's dive in.
So today you really want to lean into the conversation. We'll be talking about conflict and how to manage those high stakes kind of situations, but more importantly, how to set limits and impose consequences. So I know that has your attention already. We're delighted to have with us in the studio Bill Eddy, who will be sharing his expertise with us. So Bill, welcome. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be on with you.
Well, we're so looking forward to diving into the conversation, but as our audience knows, we need to give you your proper introduction. So John's going to share a bit of the bio with everyone. John.
Such a delight to do that. All right, here we go. So Bill Eddy has spent his career helping people navigate some of the most challenging relationship conflicts life can throw at them. He is the co-founder and director of innovation at the High Conflict Institute, and the pioneer of the high conflict personality theory, which is a framework that helps us understand and manage those tricky conversations, or those tricky relationships, I should say, with people who seem impossible to deal with, especially bullies. Now, Bill's journey is anything but ordinary. He began as a family therapist working with children and parents, then retrained as a family lawyer, representing clients in court, and later became a senior mediator at the National Conflict Resolution Center. That rare combination of psychology, law, and mediation gave him a 360-degree view of how conflict plays out and how it can be turned around. Now, having trained professionals in more than 40 US states and 13 countries and written over 20 books that have become go-to resources for dealing with difficult personalities and high-stakes disputes, today Bill shares his insights through the It's All Your Fault podcast, and we'll be talking a bit about that in a moment. It's all your fault. We hear that all the time. Also his blog on Psychology Today and the High Conflict Institute's platform, conflictinfluencer.com. Again, got to talk a bit more about that in a moment. But at the heart of his work is a conviction that even the most high-stress, high conflict relationships can shift when we have the right tools, the right habits, and the right mindset. Now, Bill, you have had such a unique career journey, therapist, lawyer, mediator. What was it that first drew you into this world of high conflict relationships, and have things changed over the time you've been working in this space?
Well, I always liked working with people, and I actually did work with kids. As I was going to college, I worked in a psychiatric hospital with a children's unit. And then I worked at an alternative school after I got out of college and dealt with a lot of the emotional issues and parents. So kind of parents and kids became my focus. And I took that into becoming a licensed clinical social worker. So I did child and family counseling in psychiatric hospitals, outpatient clinics, and I enjoyed that. But I found that a lot of my families that I worked with had legal issues such as divorce, and that they were distraught about going to court and all of that. And I learned about mediation as kind of a way to solve legal issues out of court. And so I really was drawn to mediation, conflict resolution of that form, where you sit down at a table with two people and help them resolve their dispute instead of taking them to court and having a judge resolve it. But there weren't jobs for mediators. I'm talking about like 1980. And so by 1990, I decided to go to law school, and I'd had 12 years experience as a therapist. And when I was in law school, I realized, I should get some experience practicing family law and then, do my mediation career. And I figured 2 years practicing in family court would give me enough experience and information. Well, I ended up spending 15 years in family court. because the counseling background was so helpful. I was dealing in family court with the same issues: substance abuse, child abuse, domestic violence, and personality disorders, which the court system looked at as high conflict families. And I realized, no, this is a mental health issue. Some people have personality disorders. Not everybody in the family has that. Sometimes one person does. They're like engaged in domestic violence, for example, or one person's engaged in alienating a child against the other parent. So all of that stuff, the psychological aspect of it, legal professional didn't have much of a handle on that. But since I came from the counseling field, that was the lens I was looking at. So I really got involved with this kind of high conflict angle in a unique way, like you said, as a therapist, lawyer, and mediator. So that's kind of the fast forward version of how I got here.
And if we stay there for a while, because that's fascinating. I've heard lawyers say, you know, they know the legal framework, but they don't really have the psychological background. What were the kind of insights that helped you do your job better as a family lawyer, if you were to summarize it into, you know, 3 or 4 things?
Well, I'd say the first thing that I really realized is that people think kind of based on their personality, their life experience, their perspective, and that people aren't really intending to harm other people most of the time, but the way they kind of automatically think makes them harm other people. And there's a lot of people that just really aren't self-aware. I think that's the biggest difference when people have a personality disorder or a high conflict personality. And I like the high conflict personality because it describes behavior rather than a diagnosis, because the diagnosis doesn't matter to me. What matters is the behavior. So someone with a pattern of behavior like this isn't thinking it through. They're acting more automatically. And if we can give them skills to become a little more self-aware, to manage what they say, what they do, not only will they not be as harmful to like their co-parent or the kids, but they'll also be happier.
Yeah.
And so I think that lack of self-awareness was so important, and it helps people realize this person is on automatic. They're not out to get me as their life's purpose. They're just acting out of their personality.
Yeah.
And that if we can teach them some skills, they can shift into a more kind of cooperative way of relating. So I don't know if that's one thing, but that's probably the biggest thing.
100%. You know, we totally get that, because especially in a marital dispute or family dispute where the fear levels are heightened, the stress levels are heightened, if you're not aware of your behavior, it can land that much more powerfully, harmfully, you know, all the adjectives that describe how damaging it can be. So I get that. Anything else that you found was a helpful insight to resolving in the family law situation?
Well, another that I saw is that a lot of people have biases that they think it's really like men are really the problem in relationships, or women are really the problem in relationships. And what I found, it's not a gender problem, that some men have patterns that are harmful, some women have patterns that are harmful, and we need to understand the patterns and try to change them rather than judge them. And unfortunately, a lot of what court is about is judging the past, and a lot of what mediation is about is preparing for the future. And I had this saying that in court, when there's a custody dispute, that it's when people go through court, and the high conflict cases are typically a couple of years with maybe a half dozen hearings and preparation and all this. It's really hard for the parents to have an ongoing communication relationship. Whereas when they go through mediation, most of the time they're able to communicate and manage decisions for their kids and all of that going forward. Because court focuses backwards and mediation focuses forward. And when you focus backwards, you say all these things the other person did wrong.
Mm,
They're usually not happy to hear that.
indeed, yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I found to compare, and why court's really so hard for families under stress, whether people are acting in bad ways or not. It kind of really pushes people apart and criticizes people instead of trying to build and teach and move forward. So that's a big contrast.
Yeah, indeed.
Maybe it's a slightly provocative question here, but
Here we go.
I'm wondering how many of these high conflict people are there out there? Because is it just that they turn up in relationships, and it's only in the relationships that ever go to mediation or go to court that you find, okay, there's a high conflict person in here? And the reason I ask the question is because people, certainly some of the challenge relationships we've come across, there's the other word that always gets used, which is, I happen to be married to a narcissist. And it seems like there are a lot more narcissists out there than, statistically possible than the research shows. Is it that high conflict people are born that way? Or is it that, life circumstances have put them that way? Or is it that the behavior that they have faced in the relationship has made them become this way and they're reacting to something? Is there anything like that? Any things you've identified in that space?
Yeah, no, those are very important questions, and I'm happy to say we have more answers now than I had when I got into this, really 40 years ago. And that is, first of all, there's research. When I talk about personality disorders, let me talk about personality disorders and high conflict personalities, the similarities and differences. So personality disorders have been studied for the last 50, 60 years by mental health professionals. And the diagnostic manual, it's called the DSM. The current version is the DSM-5-TR, if anybody wants to look it up.
Okay.
But that says it's about 10% of adults looking at studies from around the world.
Okay.
And so it's helpful to have kind of a number. 10% is big, but it's not 100%.
Yeah, exactly. It's still only 1 in 10. Yep.
Yeah. And so what I believe, characteristics of personality disorders is it's a rigid pattern of behavior that keeps repeating and repeating. It's interpersonal behavior. So it really is usually close relationships like family, maybe close coworker or employee and boss. It's where people have a close relationship that comes out. It's dysfunctional because it's really turns into an all or nothing power struggle, which is really hard to deal with. And it's hard in personal relationships to be dealing with someone who sees things in an all or nothing way.
Yeah.
But personality disorders, there's patterns. There's 10 in the diagnostic manual. Narcissist is one of them. But I won't go into too much depth on narcissists. Often people think narcissism means somebody's selfish, self-centered, and all of that. And you're talking about probably 60% of adults, that's part of how we survive. But the disorder is less than 10% because all 10 of these add up to about 10%. So you're looking at 2% to 6% of adults might have the disorder, which means that someone is really actively negative in putting other people down, in to put themselves up, maybe very hostile, humiliating, all of these arrogant aspects that is much more than most people. So it's a very small percent.
And did I hear you, sorry to cut you there for a second, did I hear you right when you said all 10 of these add up to only 10% of the population, all 10 of the disorders?
Right.
Okay. So it's a much, much smaller number than 10% for each of them. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Now, maybe let me know if I'm being too technical here, but the diagnostic manual splits personality disorders into 3 clusters. cluster A, cluster B, cluster C. Cluster B includes narcissistic, borderline, histrionic, and antisocial, which are considered the most dramatic, erratic, and emotional personality disorders. And that's mostly what we see like in family court with the high conflict cases. We often see someone has traits of one of those. But I want to shift to behavior, and that's where I talk about high conflict personalities. And there's maybe an overlap there. I think they're also about 10%, maybe half of them have personality disorders and half of them don't. And the characteristics that we've narrowed it down to are 4 things. Preoccupation with blaming others. It's all your fault, not 90%. It's 100% your fault and 0 my fault. That kind of thinking. And most people listening can probably think of somebody like that in their life. They have a lot of that all or nothing thinking. It's my way or the highway. They have unmanaged emotions. So they're the people that might just jump up at a staff meeting and scream something and storm out the door, or throw papers at you in the office, or at home. Sometimes there's domestic violence, or there's threats to damage someone's reputation. I'm going to say things about you that will make everybody hate you. Threats like that. So this is that unmanaged emotions. And it took me a while to realize and learn this is a characteristic of their personality, not something they thought about, gee, right now, should I scream a threat at the other person? It took them over. They really don't manage their emotions well. And we've learned that some people at least, can learn to manage their emotions better. And a lot of this, my focus is skills to help soften some of these high conflict behaviors. The 4th thing, so we've got blame, all or nothing, unmanaged emotions, are extreme behaviors. They'll often do things that 90% of people would never do. Punching a hole in the wall, hitting another person, spreading knowingly false rumors on the internet, accusing people falsely of things like child sexual abuse. And there's real child sexual abuse. What we see in family court, I believe about 2/3 of those allegations are false. Maybe half knowingly false and half honestly believed. So, and this is only like child sexual abuse allegations are only maybe 5% of court custody cases. So they're confusing people because they don't know much about it. Hey, I had a social work background and well as law, and I focused on things like this. And so I have a pretty good idea. So that's why I think we're looking about 1/3 are true. And some people have gone to prison for that. I've had cases like that. About 1/3 aren't true, but honestly believe, like, I think my child's been sexually abused, but they haven't. And the 1/3 are knowingly false in order to get an advantage in get money. I've had cases like that in order to, in one case where the former wife, the husband had remarried, and she accused him falsely, and we were able to prove it, of abusing their 4-year-old daughter. And we found out later that she did that because she wanted his new wife to split up with him so she could get back together with him.
Oh, wow.
That shows you how convoluted some of this stuff can be. Anyway, so extreme behaviors. Not all people with personality disorders have those extreme behaviors. So that's a difference. So that's a long answer to how many people have this stuff.
So with the heights, okay, so we're focusing on high conflict personalities, these people who turn up and instantly the temperature goes through the roof and you're in this high conflict situation. Lots of people, lots of us have this natural fear or this innate fear of conflict in general. How do we deal with when it becomes high conflict? And, let's move into talking about this setting limits and in imposing consequences bit.
So once again, there's four things. There's actually four things not to do, and it's important that people know this. And then there's four things to do.
Okay.
But just real briefly before that, the earlier question was, how does this form? And I wanted to comment on that.
Okay.
For some people, they are born with these personality tendencies. And to some extent, they may pass down in the family genetically. Also, early childhood abuse, etc., first 5 or 6 years could be a factor. Also, a tragedy. I had a counseling client who was a firefighter, great at his job, but when he was 1 year old, his parents died in a car crash. And so he went to live with his grandparents. When he was 2 years old, they said, this is too much for us. And so he went to live with his aunt and uncle, who then raised him to adulthood from 2.5. And he had these kind of holes in his personality and in himself, these gaps, and was insecure and was having marital difficulties that seemed related to the instability. First 5 years of life are hugely important for personality development. And first 5 years are always about close relationships, your parents, your siblings, grandparents. So some of this starts there. Mostly this doesn't start like at 20. There may be life experiences that tip people more one way or the other, but from what I've seen, we're looking at genetic tendencies or early childhood or both. So it's not something that people really have control over. This is who they became. But all adults are responsible for their own behavior. And if they have behavioral difficulties, they need to learn to overcome them in their 20s, rather than just say, hey, this is me. I punch people all the time. That's not
Not going to get you very far.
You live in a little tiny room if you do that too much. But let's talk about, I like what you're saying. So first of all, four things not to do. First of all, don't try to give the person insight into their own behavior. That high conflict people are totally offended by that, and they won't get the insight you want to give them. If they were going to get that, they would have gotten it years ago. So if you say, see, you're being narcissistic, you're too much narcissistic, you're too self-centered, can't you see that? And you would hope the person would go, oh, well, let me think about that. That's not what happens.
Not going to happen.
Hey, get out of here or whatever. I've got stories about that. The second thing is, don't focus on the past. You're going to argue forever with high conflict people about the past and not get anywhere because they're very defensive. And so if you want to get somewhere, talk about the future and what your choices are now. Let's look at what you can do now. The third thing is, don't focus on emotions. And if you're having an argument, it's easy to, just say, well, I hate you or you, whatever. But don't open up emotion. Don't say, well, how do you feel about this, buddy? Because emotions are a hard area for high conflict people to control. And they can be rational. And a lot of these folks do well in their jobs because they're not close relationships. But in their families, they have a hard time because it's a close relationship. Now, sometimes in their job, they work close together. There's a crisis and they have to be a tight team. And that's where you see some of this stuff come out. But basically, opening up emotions, they drown in their emotions. And what's interesting and sad, the 5 stages of the grieving process, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. These folks don't seem to go through that. And so they have a lot of unresolved emotions. And you kind of open the doors to a reservoir of pain and unresolved stuff when you focus on emotions. Can I confront you? Can I tell you how I feel? It's not something you want to do with high conflict. What you want to do is focus them towards the future, their choices, and thinking about what to do rather than thinking about the past, thinking inward about themselves and opening up their emotions. So keep them out of themselves, looking at what should we do now.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth thing to avoid doing is calling them names like you're a narcissist or you're a bully or you're an abuser or you're an alienator or all the labels you could possibly think of. No one likes to be labeled. And so avoid that. Even in an argument, it'll set you back months or years sometimes. People never forget what you said, what you labeled them, and it may not fit at all.
Yeah.
So that's
don't
what
rile them.
What not to do exactly. I'm here waiting. What are the things that we can be doing? We're faced with these high conflict people. What do we do? What are the things to do?
Well, we've found 4 key things that address areas they have difficulty in. I forget which hand I was using.
Yeah.
And we call this the CARS method. It's CARS.
Mm-hmm.
And C stands for connecting with the person. What you want to do is try to connect with them, to calm them and not escalate a fight, but try to show them, hey, let's be with each other here rather than against each other. And we have a technique for that. We call it ear statements that show empathy, attention, or respect. So you might show some empathy, like, I know this is a hard time. Let's slow down and talk it through. Respect. I really respect your efforts. I respect what you've done. I respect that presentation you made last week at the team meeting. And attention. I'll pay attention. I want to understand. Tell me more. I'm listening. That empathy, attention, and respect seem to speak to high conflict people and what they're desperate for. They want empathy, they want attention, they want respect, but they go about getting it in a way that pushes people away.
Yeah.
So don't let them push you away. Try to engage with them in a positive way like this. And so calming upset people with EAR is the technique to connect with them. The second is to analyze options. And as I was saying earlier, look at your choices, look ahead, look forward, what you can do now. And so one of the things is turn things into a choice and say, well, as I see it, we have a choice here. We could address this today or put it on hold, address it tomorrow. Do you want to talk about this now or you want to talk about this tomorrow? So you give people choices and it gets them thinking, because when you have a choice, you think about it. Whereas when you're told what to do, then you emotionally react. People don't like being told what to do. And that's how people deal with high conflict people. They say, now you need to do such and such. And now it's worse. You say, hey, I can see how frustrating this is. As I see it, you've got a couple choices here. Which way would you like to go? That's a whole lot more friendly, connecting kind of approach. The R is responding to misinformation or hostility. And what we find is a lot of stuff, especially in email and text messages, all of that, contains misinformation. And especially you see this on the internet. Someone will say, well, you're a jerk. You're the idiot here. You don't understand anything. The other person says, no, you're the idiot. You don't understand anything. Rather than doing that is, here's some information you may not have. So you don't argue with what someone else is saying. Just give them some information that you may not have. And that helps move it forward and make it not a contest or an argument, but, let's see what we can do with this information.
Mm-hmm.
So that's responding to misinformation. And our technique with that is we call BIFF, brief, informative, friendly, and firm emails and texts, which I can talk about if you want more on that. But now I want to get to the last, and that's the S of the CARS method, is setting limits. And so we have a new book coming out in November about this. It's called SLIC, S-L-I-C, Setting Limits and Imposing Consequences in 2.5 steps.
Okay.
So here it comes.
Everybody wants to know 2.5 steps.
Well, I most people want to jump past the first two. What's the half? You got my intrigue going. What's the half step?
No, I got to give you the first two
first.
first.
Okay.
So setting limits is people often don't feel comfortable setting limits, saying it's not okay to talk to me that way. That's setting limits. Not okay to talk to me that way. What we've learned with high conflict people is that's not enough. They'll go, I'll talk to you any way I want. So what you have to do is you have to also tell them what the consequence will be if they keep doing that. So this is fundamental and simple, and that is, if you keep talking to me that way, I'm going to end this conversation. I'm going to hang up. And so that's imposing consequences. Now, the half step is about half the time you want to give them an ear statement that shows empathy, attention, and respect. And so you might say, I know this is a frustrating time. I know you're upset. It's going to be better for us to talk again later. You keep talking to me this way, so I'm going to hang up, but call me back when you're ready to talk civilly, because I do, care about you and want to discuss this and solve this problem. So about half the time you give them an ear statement like that. And about half the time you skip that because they're going to manipulate you. They're going to say, oh, well, if you had empathy for me, you would sign this check right here. You would do this thing. You would vouch for me being here, even though I wasn't. And so about half the time, you think the person's going to be manipulative. You want to just stand firm, setting your limit and imposing your consequence. And don't give them an ear statement. Don't use. So half the time, give them some empathy, attention, and about half the time, just stay focused on the limit and the consequence so they don't manipulate you. So that's the 2.5 steps.
That's the half step. Got it.
Love that. And I hear that one, if you're going to talk to me that way, because usually that's one of the classic signs, shouting or raised voices. And you can say, if you're going to talk that way, we're going to have to end the conversation. What other limits have you found useful for people to set, and what consequences?
Well, we like to think of positive consequences as well as negative consequences. So in relationships, it's often, that thing I was going to do for you, I'm not going to help you with that if you're going to treat me this way. I was doing a consultation with a guy who's an auto mechanic, and he's helping his ex-wife with her car repairs because he's good at that. And then she started becoming intrusive in his life and getting in the way because he started dating again. It was a year after they were divorced and she wanted him back or whatever. And it's like, I'm not going to help you with your car if you keep interfering with my life. And so you can think of positive consequences that you might withhold. There's things you might not do. You might not help somebody. We give an example in the book of a teenager who's starting to swear at her father. And he's like, that's not okay. Well, I'll talk any way I want, blah, blah, blah. No, if you do that, then I'm not going to pay for that summer camp that you wanted. You can't treat me this way and then expect me to give you the benefit of these kinds of things. So just a simple pulling back something that's positive. So that's one approach. I mean, other things, it's interesting, taking cell phones away with teenagers. And with adults, let's say in the workplace,
Yeah.
is having someone be required to take a day off to think about whether they really want to work here because of doing some disruptive things. Having people have to get some coaching. We have an example in that in the book. It's a professional, a surgeon who's been yelling at nurses and turning everybody off, just grumpy kind of thing, but he's really good. And so the hospital doesn't want to fire him, but they don't want him to keep acting in this abrasive way. So they want him to get some coaching. And actually, executive coaching, professional coaching, etc. Some people that you want to keep can improve their behavior with some coaching. And so there's a description in the book of the hospital convincing this guy that he needs to get coaching. But they gave him a choice. They gave him 3 coaches. He could pick which one it was, so he didn't feel just told what to do.
Yeah.
But he needed to do that. And if he didn't, then the consequence was going to be they would have a hospital board meeting about him, in which case he might be let go. And he didn't want to be let go. He just didn't want to have to deal with his own behavior. So that's another example. Let me give you one more that I like, and we really start the book off with this. And many people may not remember this, but in the 1970s, Gerald Ford was president when Nixon left, and his wife Betty was well liked, and she had been a cancer survivor, and she was well liked by the country. Anyway, when he left the office of the president, she started drinking a lot, taking pills a lot. And so their family saw that she's kind of deteriorating and starting to be embarrassing to have anybody around. And so they decided to have an intervention, which was a real new thing then, and a chemical dependency intervention. And they got the whole family together, sat down with her, and one at a time told her how they loved her, how they'd seen her deteriorating, and that they can't support her current lifestyle. And so she really needed to go into treatment. And they had set limits with her. One of the daughters and their doctor and a secretary went to her and said, "You've got to stop doing this." And she told them to get out, "You're monsters." And that didn't work. So they got everybody together and talked about consequences. They didn't just set limits. They said, if you want us to support you to stay, keep our relationships, otherwise we're already starting to tune out from you. And she went into treatment and went on to found Betty Ford centers around the country, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have gone into recovery because of her efforts. And it was a classic setting limits and imposing consequences. We love you, but we're going to withdraw basically our support for you. And lots of empathy, attention, and respect. So that was one of half the cases where you do give your statements.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. If I can just jump in there, because I know the listeners will be thinking, where there is positional authority or the ability to put those consequences in, it will work. What about if you're an employee needing to manage upwards? Your boss is behaving too aggressively or being a bully, and you don't have that positional authority. How do you manage upwards? How do you set limits and impose consequences in that direction?
Well, one thing we recommend is to sit down with yourself or with a friend or therapist and make a list of what your choices are. In other words, you might decide, I like working for this company, but I can't work for this boss. So maybe I'm going to start looking to apply to other positions in this company. Another is I'm going to talk to human resources and see if they'll help have a meeting. where we can talk about the boss's behavior, because I kept a record here of the boss doing these different things. Another is simply taking a friendly approach to the boss and trying to say, hey, you've given me a lot of projects. I can only do so many at a time. What's your priority here? And say, so you do get some control over your schedule. I'll tell you a quick story. So I had a consultation client 2 years from retirement. She gets a new manager, and the new manager is picking on her. There's a dozen people in the department picking on her. And she's like, I can't quit because I'm 2 years from retirement. I want to keep this. And so she said, I try to avoid the manager. I scurry into my office without her seeing me when I come in the morning and stuff like that. And I said, I suggest you take the CARS approach, try to connect with your supervisor. So when you come in the morning, pop your head in and say, good morning, how's your weekend or whatever, and try to connect with her. And look at her choices. She also was a union member. And so her union set up a meeting with her and the boss and talked a little bit about what the rules are and how you treat your employees. So that was a helpful piece. And within a month, she said, I've become the boss's favorite.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
From being picked on to being favorite.
Yeah. So part of it was because she set limits and they could see she's got people have her back. So they can't get away with harassing her. But also that she made the efforts to connect and build a more positive interaction. So it may not work everywhere, but it worked well for her. Funny thing is, she said, of course, now she's picking on somebody else, so I gave him your book. It's all your fault.
Give them the same tools. So I have one other example that I want to ask a question actually and see if CARS applies here. I'm sure it does, but how does it? So it's the other way around to the question Andrea asked, which is, so you're a boss, you've got somebody in your team who is misbehaving, and you might think, okay, well, to fire them. But it turns out they're the star performer. They're the top salesperson, whatever. You don't want to lose them. You feel almost handcuffed. You've got to keep them. And a lot of bosses, I know in that situation, I've certainly seen that, will put up with bad behavior, toxic behavior, you might call it, in certain situations, just because of fear of losing them.
Yeah, because they're getting the numbers in.
They're getting the numbers in. The sales are coming through the door. If they go, everything's going to go. How do you manage those people?
Well, it's interesting. There was a study done by people with Harvard Business School, and they looked at what they called, I think you used this word, toxic employees. And what they found is they're often high performers and they're toxic. And so they said it's actually maybe that you do need to let this person go and that you'll get another high performer who isn't toxic. So don't feel your hands tied. It's not just Joe or Jane who's a good sales person. You may be better off. And they have some numbers. They looked at that. We have an article on our website called Fire or Keep High Conflict Employees.
Okay.
And what we recommend is coaching, is give the person coaching. I did a consultation for one of the high-tech companies, and they had a manager who was alienating people, writing these really nasty emails. And they said, should we fire her or what should we do? And I said, give her a chance. Give her 3 coaching sessions in how to write emails that are brief, informative, friendly, and firm, because that's our specialty. And then decide if she could change enough or have to be let go. In other words, don't just decide based on what's happened. Decide on whether they can learn. And that's so important. We say that in relationships too. Give it a try. Go to couples counseling. See if you can make this better. See if you can gain the skills. Don't focus on the past. Focus on skills for the future and see if the other person, your partner, will learn. And you'd be surprised that a lot of cases people can, and a lot of cases people can't. So with relationships as well as the workplace, is give people a chance to change, but don't wait forever if the change isn't coming.
Mm,
So
really
so
powerful.
much in there. So
I
much in there. And
know.
I'm thinking of some of these slick I was trying to think of a slick response to come back with here, but there's so much you've shared here, Bill. People are going to want to find out about the resources that you have. I'm conscious we're up against the clock here now. How can they find out more? We get more information, websites, book. Where can people go?
That's another
Yeah,
book I'm going to buy.
So the two websites we have, one is geared towards professionals, training, etc., and it's highconflictinstitute.com.
And when you
And
say
the other one,
professionals, meaning what? This is mediators, lawyers who are working in this space.
lawyers, mediators, nurses, social workers,
Okay.
judges, human resources, employee assistance counselors. So a lot of professionals that deal with conflict in the
Yeah.
workplace and families, etc.
Perfect.
Then, and anybody can come to there. Then we have conflictinfluencer.com. And that's for any individual who may be dealing with a family, workplace situation as an individual and talking about skills they can use. Like you said, the question about what do you do when it's your supervisor? How do you set limits on your supervisor? Things like that. So we have classes, we have articles, we have books, we have video trainings, a lot of resources there. So what you could do is go to both websites and see if you find something that you think will be helpful to you. And also we have our podcast. It's All Your Fault, dealing
All
with
your fault.
people. And anybody can listen to that. And I haven't checked the numbers recently, but apparently I think we're in our 5th year. And people around the world are listening to that. It always surprises me. They say, yeah, I listened to your podcast. I say, oh, good.
And just tell us quickly, Bill, what's the focus of the podcast? Do you have guests? What's the topic? How does it work? What do you get?
We occasionally have guests. A lot of it is Megan Hunter and I. We co-founded High Conflict Institute in 2008. And she focuses more on workplace and business. I focus more on legal and mediation. But we talk about skills, we talk about problems. People send us questions, and we often answer those for high conflict, difficult situations. So it's anything that really comes under this high conflict area or dealing with someone with a high conflict personality. And so that's the topics. Occasionally we'll have guests. We've had a variety over the years, so it's hard to kind of list.
Yeah.
But it's all this high conflict stuff from different angles. One thing I want to mention, I mentioned domestic violence. I mentioned parental alienation, where a child resists a parent. And these are two really big areas that I think we get looked to by judges, lawyers, therapists for dealing with these because we have a broader perspective and, we see it more as how to manage the conflict and how to help people change rather than deciding if mom's bad or dad's bad, which is not a good approach.
And lastly, Bill, you have a very slick book coming out. Tell us about Slick.
Yes. So Slick Solutions, Setting Limits and Imposing Consequences in 2.5 Steps. And so that's the S of the CARS method. We have a technique for C, for A, for R, and for S. And we already have books for the other 3 techniques, but this is the newest one coming out in November. And you can already pre-order it on Amazon or come to our website, highconflictinstitute.com. You can access all our books there. I think you can also from Conflict Influencer. But it's Slick, S-L-I-C Solutions. And I'm really proud of trying to simplify complicated subjects.
Yeah.
And so we struggled to find a good kind of 4-letter word And setting limits, imposing consequences was so slick, we had to use that.
Yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. It's the same challenge we have trying to make things simple for people, for ourselves. I mean, we started with that. How do we make it simple for ourselves to get it? And then we started sharing there. So we're on that same page there. So it's been so good having you here, Bill, sharing your wisdom over the years. And I'm sure the audience has just benefited so much from this conversation.
100%. It's just so empowering in the face of what can feel scary sometimes, conflict. You have the power to set limits and impose consequences by saying, this doesn't work for me, and I'll stop doing this, or I'll leave or something until we can find a better way. Pause it until, we always say, until you have fresh energy and fresh manners.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's been my pleasure to talk with you. You folks are great, and I really encourage your style is one that I think people really listen to and learn a lot from. So thanks for letting me be part of your program.
Amazing. It's been our pleasure to have you join us. Thanks for making the time, Bill.
Well, to our listeners around the world, we say thanks again for joining us for another fascinating episode. High conflict.
Insightful on how to deal with it. Don't fear it, deal with it.
And if you're one of those people who has been labeled a high conflict person, well, what are you going to do about it? What's the self-awareness that you can develop to help you manage that and sort of come off that ledge and step away from that and be a nicer person to be around? What a fascinating conversation. We look forward to the next time. But
Loads
again,
for us all
thank
to
you,
learn.
Bill. And to our audience, for now, it's a wrap. Bye-bye.
It's a wrap.
Thanks for tuning in to the 4 Habits podcast. Now, if today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget, take our free relationship skills quiz at the4habits.com/skills quiz to start improving your relationships today. Hit subscribe and we'll see you next time.